It's our first show of a brand new year, and we're raring to go. We're keeping tabs on the week's most impactful local news stories, from the big deals and the biggest newsmakers to the decisions and happenings that could affect you most. It's your Local Week Reviewed. Next.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Great to be back with you. I'm Nick Haynes, and welcome to the first 2020 edition of Kansas City Week in Review. And thank you for making this program part of your New Year's resolution. Energized for the task at hand are our team of news reviewers from KCMO Talk Radio, Pete Mundo; from KMBC 9 News, Chief Political Reporter Michael Mahoney; from the Tribune News Service, nationally syndicated columnist Mary Sanchez; and from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Just after a near record year for homicides in Kansas City, new Mayor Quinton Lucas now on the offensive, pushing to bring down the number of murders in the city to less than 100. He's now suing a gun manufacturer and several known gun dealers for creating a public nuisance and endangering lives in the city.
Illegal gun trafficking has created a public nuisance that has led to deaths in our community, a nuisance that has led to crime throughout our community, and it has made Kansas Cityans less safe each day.
Now, the mayor says this marks the first time in 10 years that a city has filed a lawsuit against the gun industry. Other cities have lost those legal battles. So why does Quinton Lucas think he'll be more successful, Mike?
They believe that they have a case here. Does two things. Number one, involves the organization around illegal guns getting on the street, and number two, that the gun manufacturer that's the defendant in this, Jimenez Arms out of Nevada, knowingly participated in this, that they were dealing with a unlicensed gun dealer. And that's what makes these lawsuits so difficult to win on behalf of gun control advocates, is you have to prove that there was knowledge that they deliberately violated the law. That's why there haven't been suits like this for the last 10 years.
I heard the mayor on your program, Pete Mundo, on KCMO Talk Radio, and he's talking about this is one of his biggest priorities, reducing the number of homicides in this city. But how does filing a lawsuit against gun manufacturers actually do that?
Well, I think this kind of ties into a lot of the little things he's done on the ordinance front throughout 2019, and this kind of parlays off of that, where he's going to say, yes, there's big things I need to do. Detectives, officers, help the Jackson County with its jail issue. I got to do all that. But I'm going to do everything I can with just a stroke of a pen to try to also alleviate this problem. He knows that if he wants to get reelected to a second term, he's got to get this number down. And he mentioned getting it under 100. And he's got to say, I've done everything I can do individually, and then we've worked with the state to do everything we can do together to try to improve this number. It's going to be tough.
Mary.
Well, and he also knows that there are other factors that are already being handled. I mean, KCPD is making massive changes in how they're confronting these violent crime. One of the most recent is that they're going to try and, I think it's double even, the number of the assault detectives, and that's to go after the people who are doing, there's a lot of drive-by shooting that occurs where people literally almost are shot on the street. These non-fatals, to go after those and even realign when those officers are on duty, because they generally, these shootings happen at night, and then the people that are doing the detective work were coming in at different hours. There's all sorts of things like that. But in terms of this lawsuit, one of the things that I think it does is also kind of almost build some empathy. There's a disconnect with lots of portions of the metro, not for racist ideals or anything, but because these crimes, these murders are not happening generally in their community, and they don't know the victims. They don't see or feel the impact at their church on Sunday. What this does is it kind of draws that line and lets people know it's a bigger problem of how these guns end up in the urban core.
How much of these moves, though, are symbolic in nature, Dave? We've heard, for instance, about the ordinances that the mayor and the city council passed last year, which would take guns away from minors and also make it harder for domestic abusers to have weapons. And yet I see Missouri lawmakers saying we don't want to see any changes to the provision of firearms. Does that undo those provisions?
No, but let's be clear. Most of what the mayor is doing is largely symbolic. Even the lawsuit, which will take years to adjudicate, and an A to B connection between the lawsuit and reducing gun violence is going to be difficult to make. But in that sense, it's successful because people in Kansas City think the mayor is trying to do something, whatever he can do, even if it might be at the margins and more symbolic than anything else. The mayor has set an enormously difficult target in reducing murders in Kansas City. If you go from 150 murders to 100, that's a 33% increase. That means roughly one less murder a week in Kansas City. That's a very, very difficult target. Ultimately, Nick, that's how he'll be judged. If murders come in at 140 in 2020, then he'll be judged a failure. If they're closer to 100 or under 100, he'll be considered successful.
No. If he drops it by 100, by 10 murders in 1 year, he's not going to be judged as a failure like this.
He'll be a failure on that issue.
No,
Mike.
No, he won't. Perhaps over the term, okay, but this is a long-term issue, and it's not just going to be what happened at the end of 2019 versus the end of 2020.
To Dave's point, though, I mean, you can get down to 140 by luck, right? I mean, we can reduce this by 10, and it won't be because there was any type of major reform. You just got lucky. You missed a few. I mean, so if it's going to be judged by 2023, I want to see, you want to see a 4-year trend.
Right.
I'm not going to judge it based on where we are a year from now. I'm going to judge it based on where we are in 4 years from now from when he started his
Just let
term.
me throw this quickly. I would agree with that, except the mayor himself has made that statement. I mean, he has set the bar in an extraordinarily difficult place. Now, he can be praised for that because bringing murders down to that degree would be an enormous accomplishment. But he set the bar, and I think people will judge him by that. And I think they agree with Mike and Pete and Mary that it is a long-term, difficult process, but he's the one who set this goal up, and we'll see how he executes.
Your state lawmakers are getting back to business on both sides of state line. Missouri lawmakers opened the 2020 session Wednesday. Kansas lawmakers are not due back until Monday, but a major deal already struck after years of wrangling. The Kansas governor and the Kansas Senate Majority Leader reaching agreement to expand Medicaid in the state. It would add up to 150,000 Kansans to that program. After years of saying it was a terrible idea, why now, Michael?
Because this is a pretty good political deal in the sense it's not as big as the Democrats wanted. It's not as tight as the Republicans wanted. They found some ground in the middle where they can do this. Denning has 22 co-sponsors in the state Senate. It needs 21 votes to pass out of the Senate. A Medicaid expansion bill got out of the Kansas House last year. They met in the middle here, and not a bad deal.
Is that just because they've reached an agreement, that's the governor and the Senate Majority Leader, does that mean that actually gets passed, though, by the legislature?
Well, you'll hear different theories. I think it is a safe bet it'll pass in the Senate. As Mike points out, it has a majority of co-sponsors. The House is a different issue. There are probably the votes in the Kansas House to pass it, but it isn't clear the leadership is all that enthusiastic about bringing this to the floor or doing what it can to speed this up. So it may be a little bit more problematic in the House than in the Senate. But quickly, Nick, the reason this has been adopted in part is because public opinion has really shifted on this issue across the country, not just Kansas. It may be on the ballot in Missouri. Passed on the ballot in Utah and in Maine. Oklahoma is thinking about it. Louisiana has talked about expanding Medicaid. The idea of making insurance more available to the working poor is really come of age, and that's why Kansas is.
And it's not like a lot of states haven't already done this. We're up to about 35 states that have already said now they will.
36.
36, okay.
Yeah.
Is this now the biggest issue facing lawmakers in Topeka this year, or is there something else we need to be paying attention to, Mary?
I think you could easily argue for some other issues as well, but frankly, I'm going to really watch this for the reasons that Dave was just stating. I mean, it is a chance for the governor to lay it out there that she's able to make these bipartisan deals, and it is this shift. I think people are tired. Voters are tired. They want to see politicians do something that will actually help them, and people do understand that this can help people.
Is this the big issue now for the session, or is there something else?
No, this is it. Denning mentioned on my show Friday that he thinks he's got the votes in the House, but we'll see what leadership actually ends up doing. To Dave's point, I just think it's interesting. You had this unusual coalition of Democrats and rural conservative Republicans who are trying to save their rural hospitals through this expansion of Medicaid. Whether it works when you increase the demand by 100,000+, where are you getting the increase in supply from, especially in the rural parts of the state? That remains to be seen. So we're not going to judge this similar to the homicide rate on whether or not it's a success for a couple of years.
Just very quickly that I think one of the bigger issues in Topeka this year will be tax reform. The governor's put together a task force to take a look at it. There will be pressure from Republicans to do something on property tax relief, and then the food sales tax remains extraordinarily high, and there may be some movement on that as well.
Complete this sentence for me, Michael Mahoney. The biggest issue facing Missouri lawmakers in 2020 is blank.
The budget. They are looking at a budget down in future years out. They're terrified they're going to lose a lawsuit to the prison guards. It's going to cost them $100 million. They are very concerned that there's going to be a downturn in the economy. Big fight is going to be over the budget in the state of Missouri. There'll also be a heck of a fight over Republican efforts to reform the Clean Missouri redistricting battle that voters approved in 2018. But the budget, the money bag, is going to be the big thing.
Did anybody else have a different big issue for the state of Missouri in 2020?
I think the one that they're going to be arguing over, I completely agree with what Mike said in terms of what the top ones are going to be. But again, almost as Kansas, I want to see Missouri get it together on the guns and start to see a little bit more of that middle ground. The governor has met now over and over again in KCMO, in St. Louis. He's heard more of these arguments. He's seen how gun laws need to play out differently in rural communities and also.
Yes. But rather than guns, state lawmakers in Missouri, Republicans are talking about changes to things like parole. And it's become too easy, they claim, to get out of prison so swiftly. And that's why we're seeing this increase in violent crime, not guns themselves.
And Governor Parson came on my show this week, and I asked him, say, what's that relationship going to be like between yourself and the mayors, Quentin Lucas in St. Louis and Springfield? And he said guns is a non-starting point. He said, we'll talk about mental health. We'll have the conversation about, what we were discussing there. But the guns are a non-starting point, which surprised me because I came out of that meeting in the fall after they all met there and thought that there was going to be maybe some agreement. But the mayor made it clear this week that we're not even starting on the gun conversation.
And certainly Governor Parson will be running for election this year, too.
Yeah, the one thing that will emerge from this talk with the mayors, as far as the governor is concerned, and probably the legislature, is a witness protection bill. Astonishingly, Missouri doesn't have much on the books in terms of protecting witnesses, and that's a big problem here in Kansas City and in St. Louis and everywhere. Nobody wants to snitch. So of all the stuff that the mayors were talking about, look for this witness protection thing to get a lot of eyeballs on it, and it'll be one thing that Mayor Lucas really lobbies for when he's down there. He's going to be down for the State of the State next week.
It always seems so far away. Now, the first and most visible test of candidate support in the 2020 presidential election is a little more than 3 weeks away. It is the Iowa caucuses, and while much of the political world will be focused on that state to our north, many here wondering, when do we get our say, and will anybody care? In our neck of the woods, Missouri goes first. That's March 10th, after 18 other states have already weighed in. First of all, is this going to be a primary, and does that mean anyone can vote?
Yeah, in Missouri, you don't register by party. You don't pull ballots by party as you do in Kansas, for example. There may be some early movement to cancel the Missouri primary because the Republicans don't want any opposition to Donald Trump. And some Missouri Republicans are saying, well, why are we helping the Democrats pick a nominee? That's a waste of money. I don't think it'll work because I think people are used to it. Kansas is already, the
okay, we'll talk about those in a second, but
caucuses.
after 18 years, after 18 states will have already voted, will anybody care what Missouri has to think?
No, it's just not that interesting this year on the Missouri side of the state. So I don't think it's gonna come, it's gonna go. We'll talk about it for a day and move on.
Mike.
I disagree, Pete. Almost 180 degrees on this, and here's why. The Democratic primary is not going to be settled in the first four: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. The Super Tuesday caucus, or Super Tuesday primaries on March the 3rd, are not probably going to resolve it. March is going to be a determining month, and so that second level of primaries on the 10th, of which Missouri is one of them, is going to be a factor on this. And if it is all balled up, maybe even Kansas way back in on May the 2nd might have something to say. That's one of the reasons they put it where they did. I think Missouri and those 9 or 10 other states on March 10th are going to be in play.
Now, 40 states will have already voted by the time Kansans weigh in. That's May 2nd. Will everyone get to vote in that contest, Dave?
Now, that's a different deal. You
Okay.
register by party, and registered Democrats will go to caucus sites. And I think this year aren't they doing mail-in ballots? There are some changes.
It's a primary in Kansas this year.
Yeah, for the Democrats,
Yeah.
not for the Republicans.
Yeah.
So.
There isn't a vote for the Republicans.
Right. The Republican Party has said we're not paying for it, and again.
So Republicans don't have no say. Democrats will have a chance to go.
Yes, and the format of it is under some change, and I'll work on that next time we talk about this. I'll have a better understanding of it, so it'll have some role. But traditionally, I'm between Pete and Mike, at least theoretically. I think Missouri and Kansas
What an awful place to be.
That's right. Will theoretically have some role, but not a huge role in determining the nominee.
Will we be seeing a lot of these presidential candidates coming our way?
We're going to see some TV spots.
Okay.
We're going to start seeing TV spots this weekend. President Trump is going to have buying time on the Super Bowl Sunday night. I believe Bloomberg is doing the same thing. We may get some tarmac stops here. Mainly, it's going to be TV ads.
Now, while we haven't even come fully to grips with the 2020 presidential race yet, Politico is already shortlisting the 2024 presidential field. And remarkably, a Kansan and Missourian are on that list. From Kansas, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is spotlighted as someone with a keen interest in inheriting the Trump mantle. And in Missouri, Senator Josh Hawley getting prime billing on their 2024 presidential list. Hawley, Politico claims, may be the Republican Obama. No man is better positioned to shape the future of conservatism. Is Politico off on its assessment, or do both of these men have their sights on the nation's top job, Mary?
Possibly, but I think there's so much that can happen between now and then. It's a little insane, and I do think people get a little tired of these, what, you didn't have anything else to write about? That aren't there a lot of things going on in the world that you had to drum this up? Pompeo is building a reputation in ways that's either good or bad. I mean, his future is going to hang on what happens.
Would partly his ambition be the reason why he is not wanting to, as we hear this week, run for the United States Senate race in Kansas?
Possibly. I think that's part of it, but a lot of it came down to what happened the past week. I was told that basically he was running up until, Soleimani was killed last week and everything fell apart. But, I'm going to say this, and all my colleagues here will probably say I'm more wrong than I'm right. That's okay. But I think Politico is snooping on my show because I said over the summer, 2024 could be a border war, Josh Hawley, Mike Pompeo for that presidential nomination. I'm just saying.
Are you biting your tongue over there, Mike?
Well,
Again?
Yeah, always. The piece, Mary, came from Politico. That's what they do, is they thumbsuck politics all the time. I think Josh Hawley started running for the United States Senate when he became the Missouri Attorney General. I believe he started getting presidential ambitions when he became a United States Senator.
Yeah.
I think Pompeo, through his emergence in the Trump administration, has now developed presidential ambitions. We'll see. And just to go there really quickly, I think Pompeo is out of the Kansas Senate race, but I am not guaranteed that that's going to happen. Watch where the money goes in the first quarter. If the money starts to pile into the rest of the candidates, then he really is out.
So you still think okay.
I'm saying I don't think the door's shut.
Okay, Dave?
Two things. First, as Pete Mundo goes, so goes the nation. I think we all understand.
Well, we know that.
We know that. And second, Josh Hawley actually started running for president when he was 8 years old. I mean, his ambition is clear. He's already having the classic cocktails with rich people in Washington to talk about his future, the kind of conversations that all young senators who are getting good press have. His ambition to be president of the United States is overwhelming and crystal clear. That's why he's out front on impeachment this week, because he's going to try to do a neat trick of assuming the Trumpian mantle without going there completely. Once the 2020 election is over. I don't think he has an absolute clear path, but he is on it. He is running for president.
Okay, we don't always thumbsuck politics on this program, though, and we have other issues to tackle. With a brand new year comes brand new laws. If you drive a hybrid or electric vehicle in Kansas, expect to start paying more for the privilege. Starting this week, you'll be slapped with a $50 registration charge if you drive a hybrid, $100 if you're tooling around town in an electric vehicle. The Kansas legislature pushing those fees to help offset the loss of gas tax revenue that helps pay for state highways. In Missouri, thousands of workers will be getting paid more as the minimum wage increases this week to $9.45, part of a 2018 ballot question that over time time will raise the minimum wage in Missouri to $12. What's striking is that Kansas is now $2.20 behind Missouri when it comes to paying the minimum wage. Does that big discrepancy cause a new border battle with Missouri businesses now sort of slipping over to the Kansas side because they'll have to pay less?
I doubt it, because the types of workers that are in these jobs, it's kind of dependent on a geography. I don't think they're traveling long distances. It's not like that business is going to up and move across the state line just to take advantage of this. But this is one of these long-term conversations, too, that I think Kansans will be watching. You know, the argument was, if you raise these wages too fast, which is why we didn't get to 15 right away, it will really harm some of these businesses. And that's, you know, restaurants in particular really see that. But we'll have an experiment now. What's going to happen in Missouri? How is it going to play out in the business community? What is the effect? Kansas ought to be watching that, and I guarantee you the people who are behind these movements, who pushed it through, are watching.
And Kansas now has one of the lowest minimum wage laws in the country.
I
never heard you mention, though.
But it's at the federal minimum, so it's not just Kansas.
Is there a push, though, to increase it in Kansas?
I don't see one.
No, but there will be a push, I think, to increase it at the federal level, or it will be an issue in the presidential campaign, because the federal minimum wage has remained unchanged for so many years. And again, I think the pressure from the public is all on the side of paying more to people who work at the lower end of the scale.
Now, one of the most contentious issues in Kansas City last year was a fight over a street renaming. Is Kansas City ready for another one? A city council member now proposing renaming 12th Street on the south side of City Hall after longtime city manager Troy Schulte. That stretch of road would be renamed Troy Schulte Way. Mayor Lucas is hitting the pause button. What is his concern?
Well, there, go ahead, Pete.
I was going to say, it can't go any worse than the MLK Jr. street name change went, but I am also still waiting for the Clay Chastain Way to go into place after he lobbied for a street name for himself. What's the upside, right? What's the upside versus the downside? The downside is you rile up people at the grassroots level and they overturn the street name, like with MLK. The upside is you appease Troy Schulte. I mean, it's the downside far exceeds the upside.
Mike.
Okay, remember, there are these brown or honorary street signs peppering Kansas City all over the place. This is not changing the name of the street to Troy Schulte Way. It's an honorary designation. Seems like small beer to me.
But he just left City Hall. Now they want to honor him, yet we haven't done anything to honor former Mayor Mark Funkhauser.
You think that's an accident?
Okay.
And I don't see that movement
Or Sly
occurring.
James, at that matter.
Absolutely. These honorariums, as you mentioned, I mean, they are all over. No one really even knows where most of them are. I mean, you kind of notice them as you drive by. And frankly, no offense to Troy, but I'm opposed to naming things for people who aren't deceased yet. I mean, does anyone remember Page Arena down at MU? And they had to strip the name after there was a scandal. It was a Walmart heiress who had cheated to get her degree through USC. I mean, it's just not a good idea. I mean, I just kind of have a firm rule about that. I would rather not see these types
And what
of
was the firm rule of Dave Helling on that?
Well, first, the firm rule, as I think we all know around this table, is you only get to mention Clay Chastain once a year, and Pete has already used his,
Okay, all
so
right.
we won't hear it from him until 2021.
Okay.
Second, I think an honorific, which is what Mike is talking about, is fine for Troy. It's not permanent. Carl DiCapo has a street name for him, that type of thing. So I don't think it is small potatoes, as Mike suggests. The MLK thing, though, remains an issue. January 20th is Martin Luther King Day, and if you don't think people are going to talk about that vote and where we are in that process, you're sadly mistaken.
And it's important, Dave, I think, to say that Troy Schulte Way and the King-Paseo debate are two different issues completely.
Right.
Now, when you put a show like this together every week, it's hard to get to every story making the news. What was the big story we missed? Was it fear of the white, or was Kansas City too busy seeing red as Chiefs playoff hoopla dominates the local conversation? It's a new year filled with closings and layoffs, Hallmark announcing 400 job cuts, Macy's shuttering its longtime store in Prairie Village, and no warning this week for nearly 200 workers fired at Premier Surfaces in Riverside.
We were notified by email. The email was just as cold and concise as it could possibly be.
In Overland Park, a vote leaving some residents excited and others angry as the city approves expanding the Overland Park Arboretum. In Lee Summit, questions about diversity 6 months after its superintendent resigned amid concerns over racial tension, only white finalists make the cut to replace him. Wanted, a new head for the Kansas City Library, Crosby Kemper, now officially confirmed by the U.S. Senate to lead the main federal agency responsible for funding our nation's museums and libraries. From weatherman to politician, former meteorologist Mike Thompson surprises by announcing a conservative Republican run for the Kansas Senate. And in a story that's been making national news, a Kansas police officer resigns after falsely claiming a McDonald's worker wrote pig and worse on the side of his coffee cup.
I hope he understands the magnitude of the black eye that this gives the law enforcement profession from coast to coast.
Just some of the stories. Panelists, was it one of those or something completely different, Pete?
I went with a friend of our show, Mike Thompson, who since leaving as a weatherman has gotten down the political road a little bit. He became a friend of the show. And also, just real quick, that state Senate race, the Democrat in that race has raised 60 grand, second most in the state of anybody. So that's going to be an interesting, very local race to watch.
Lee Summit superintendent story. That's something to keep our eyes on.
Mary.
I'm going to go with the layoffs just because it hits so many people, and I think it kind of alters your reality a bit when you hear that the economy is doing so well, but in some sectors, not so much.
And I didn't even mention Dave Smith, the lamp maker, also closing this week.
Two state senators in Missouri, Kiki Curls and Jason Holzman, are apparently going to quit to take full-time state jobs that pay more than $100,000 a year each. That will essentially, Nick, leave Kansas City south of the river unrepresented in the state Senate for the entire year of 2020. It's appalling.
And before we leave, a farewell and a rest in peace to the man who put this program on the air. In fact, he's the man who hired me at KCPT. Former station leader Bill Reed has died. He was 81 years old. And that is our Week in Review. Our thanks to our news reviewers from the Tribune News Service, Mary Sanchez, and keeping you abreast of the news weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on KCMO Talk Radio, Pete Mundo. From KMBC 9 News, Michael Mahoney, and the stars, Dave Helling. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.